mostly just want to welcome you all. My name is Ellen Grant, and I'm Chief Operating Officer here at GMRI. And I think I am now here, right?
Yes.
All right. So, welcome to our redesigned C-State series. Many of you have been to our prior version, but we've adapted it now for this beautiful new space that we have. How many people have already been to this space? New Cohen Center. Great. We really love it. We hope you will too. And we're trying to make use of it in a slightly different way with this series. The goal for the series as a whole is really to deepen your understanding of the Gulf of Maine. And this particular series is on sustainable seafood. And our goal for this one tonight is to increase your ability to buy and eat more local seafood. So we hope we're successful on that. I want to thank our sponsors, the Morton Kelly Charitable Trust and Rising Tide Brewery for providing the beer. Thank you. And here's the plan for tonight. We're going to hear first from a GMRI staff person, who I'll introduce in a moment. And then we're going to hear from one of our partners. Then we're going to throw it to you all at each of your small tables. We'll be asking you some questions to think about together. And then we'll hear back from you in the full group, answer some questions you may have, hear your comments, and then we'll get going with the idea of being out of here by 7. And hope you have a good time. So let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce our staff member who will be really hosting you tonight, and that would be Kyle Foley. Kyle is the Senior Program Manager for our Sustainable Seafood program here at GMRI, a really successful and long-standing program that we're very proud of, and she'll tell you a little bit more about it. Thank you.
Great. Hopefully you all can hear me. I think this might not. So I need to get it closer to my... It's making noises. All right, is that a little better? I can also speak loudly. Sounds like it's on. It's definitely making noise. You tell me. All right. Please hold on just a second. Sorry, doing things backwards here. Is that any better? All right, I'm just going to go for it. So thank you all for coming tonight. We're really excited that you're all here and that you're interested in learning more about sustainable seafood and local seafood from the Gulf of Maine. And we'd like to start off actually by asking you a few questions and just trying to check the pulse a little bit of what you all think about local seafood and the Gulf of Maine. And so I think in a moment some survey questions are going to pop up on the screen. And we're going to use this neat system. So if you have a phone and the ability to text, you can participate in this poll. If you don't have a phone and you'd really like to participate, raise your hand and we can have a couple of staff members maybe share their phones with you. But it doesn't require downloading anything. There's a piece of paper on the tables with a screenshot. So if you pull up a new text message where you would put the phone number, you want to type 22333, and then the message that you will send should say C-State 335. So that's on a piece of paper on your table if you couldn't hear what I said. So again, type where you would normally type the phone number, 22333, and then where you would normally type the text message, C-State 335. And then it should, I think, pop back a message to you. Can people give me a thumbs up if it seems to be working for you so far? Okay, looking like we're doing well. Okay, so once you get there, you can text your answer to this question. Text A, B, C, D, or E. And in a moment, we will show you what your collective answers are. It's totally anonymous, so we're not going to keep track of the totals, but we give a thumbs up if you've sent your answer in? All right. Looks like we're looking good. Sophie, do you want to show us the responses? Okay. So it looks like most of you are eating seafood pretty regularly, either 1 to 2 times a week or 1 to 3 times a month, which is great. So we're going to go to the next question. How important is it to you that the seafood you eat is local? So text in your answer. You don't have to think too hard about it. So just answer A, B, C, or D, whatever your gut check is. Can we get a thumbs up again if you've texted your answer in? Great, all right. Very important, excellent, all right. Good to hear. So next question. How willing are you to try a new type of seafood that you've never eaten before? A, B, or C? So give me a thumbs up again if you have. All right, sounds good. Very willing, all right. An adventurous crowd, that's great. Okay, we'll go to I think the final question here. How do you know whether the seafood you buy is local or sustainable? So I can read these if it's hard to see any of them. A is I know if it's labeled local or sustainable. B, I recognize the species and assume it is one that's caught locally or sustainably. C, I trust the market or restaurant. And D, I don't know. And if you can give me the thumbs up if you submitted your answer. All right, great. I think we're okay. Cool. All right, great. Well, thank you guys for participating. We're actually going to go through a couple of those questions again at the end, and it'll be interesting to see if anyone's answers change after hearing our presentations tonight. So now we're going to jump into the presentations. I'm going to start by just setting a little bit of context about why we're here, why we should care about local seafood, what's behind our interest in getting more local seafood out there. And then Kate Masery, who is here from Eating with the Ecosystem, a nonprofit that's based down in Rhode Island, is then going to tell you about some of the work that they're doing in a really neat citizen science project that they have done over the past couple of years. And then I'll talk to you again just for a few minutes about some of the ways that you can find local seafood around here. To get us started, I just wanted to share our mission on the seafood program here at GMRI is to strengthen both the economic and the ecological sustainability of the Gulf of Maine seafood industry. So what that really means is that we'd like to see more healthy local seafood on people's plates, and we would also like to see fishing and coastal communities in this region thriving and not just surviving. And so I'm going to talk to you just briefly about some of the things we mean behind ecological and economic sustainability. So this slide might look a little technical, and I'm not going to get into the weeds at all, but I did want to highlight that when we talk about ecological sustainability with fisheries here, in the US, we have a federal as well as state fisheries management or regulatory systems. And basically what that means is we have fisheries scientists who are looking and researching how many fish are actually out there here in our region as well as other regions around the country. And then they're looking to see, based on what they know about how many fish are out there, how many fish we can actually allow fishermen to harvest and still maintain a renewable resource. Ellen, were you signaling that I needed to speak up?
Yes.
Okay. So we've got a lot of fisheries science going on in this country. We also have a lot of fisheries policy, and we have a robust regulatory system. It's a very public system and process. That image that you see on the right there is an example of the maze of committee meetings that it takes to develop a management plan for one fishery here in New England. And essentially what that management system at the federal or the state level is trying to do is, at a very simple level, determine who gets to go out and harvest the fish, and how do we limit that harvest to make sure that that resource remains renewable, that we're leaving enough fish in the water for the future. So we have these systems in place. They're not perfect, but they are some of the best fisheries management systems in the world here in our country. We've improved them a lot over time, and there's a lot of ongoing work to continue improving them. So I also want to talk about economic sustainability and first set a little bit of context about what the seafood industry actually looks like here in our region, because I think it's easy as New Englanders, we sort of know some of the traditional favorites. We think we know what the industry looks like, but there's many different sectors within the seafood industry. Just like there is a dairy and a beef and a produce industry within agriculture, there are many different pieces of the seafood industry here in New England. And by far, the two biggest parts of our industry here in New England are lobster and scallops. They're high volume and high value fisheries. You can see the numbers here on the screen. That lobster in Maine is a $400 or $500 million fishery in the past few years. Scallops, which are really based around the port of New Bedford down in Massachusetts, is close to a $400 million industry. These are really big, valuable industries that compete on a global scale and marketplace. But some of the other fisheries that we have and some of our other traditional favorites, like the cod and haddock of the world, are not what they once were in this region, but we do have a lot of healthy local ground fish, which is sort of the category that cod and haddock and other flounders and redfish and hakes fit under. And those fisheries in all of New England and the mid-Atlantic in this same year brought in about $85 million to the fishermen. That's a pretty different number. And one of the reasons for that is that we in the US import about 90% of the seafood that we eat. And so that means 9 out of 10 times when you're eating seafood or out at a restaurant, there's a good chance that it's coming from some other part of the world. And people often hear that statistic, I think, in New England and say, well, that can't really be true here. This is New England, right? But unfortunately, even in New England, there's a good chance when you go to your favorite seafood shack that the lobster and the scallops and the clams, the shellfish are pretty local. There's also a decent chance that cod or haddock might be coming from some other part of the world where the fish is more consistently available and cheaper. And so one of the other challenges that the fishermen in this region face is that we as a country don't actually eat all that much seafood. And what we do eat is mostly these 4 species: shrimp, salmon, canned tuna, and tilapia is the one in the bottom corner there. So about 2/3 of all the seafood that we eat in this country are these 4 species. But to me, the huge opportunity is really represented in the tilapia, because that's a flaky whitefish. And we have lots of wonderful flaky whitefish and other similar types of species here in our region. A lot of species that we call underloved or underutilized because people just aren't aware of them, and so fishermen can't necessarily justify a trip to go out and catch those fish because they aren't going to have a market to sell them into, or they're not going to get a good enough price. So Kate is going to talk to you a lot more about some of these types of fish and opportunities to try and find them out in the marketplace. Thanks, Kate.
Can you guys hear me at all? All right, I'm just going to talk really loudly and hope you guys can hear me in the back. So I'm Kate Beasery. I'm the program director at Eating with the Ecosystem. So as Kyle said before, we're a small nonprofit. We're based in Rhode Island, but we do work all around New England to promote what we call a place-based approach to sustaining New England's wild seafood. And this is kind of a different approach than a lot of the sustainability approaches that are out there, and so I kind of want to just walk you through it real quick. We have what we call our 5 anchors, which are really our principles of a place-based approach to sustaining New England's wild seafood. And so the first one is proximity. We want you to eat local seafood. And we're really lucky here in New England to have 3 really productive ecosystems that produce a wide variety of different seafood species for us to enjoy. Gulf of Maine, Georges Bank, and the Mid-Atlantic Bight. And so between the three of those, there's hundreds of species that we could be eating. So our next one is symmetry. For us, we don't want you to just eat local seafood. We want you to eat a diversity of local species, but in proportion to their natural abundances. And this is important because if we go and eat only one species or two species, the species that eat those species are going to be impacted, the species that are eaten by those species are going to be impacted, and you can have these kind of cascading effects down our marine food webs. And so if instead we eat in balance with the ecosystem, hence our name, we maintain much more natural marine food webs and have less negative impacts on our marine ecosystems as a whole. And so we call this eating like a fish. It's being less choosy and selective about what we're enjoying and being a little bit more opportunistic, kind of like a fish is, in terms of what's actually available to us and being produced locally. Our next one's adaptability. For us, it's, as you guys probably know, I feel like we've got a pretty kind of seafood savvy crowd. Our ecosystems are not static. They're constantly changing. And so whether that's seasonal changes or longer term changes such as climate change, our ecosystems change and the species within them change as well. And so for us, it's really important that you adapt your diets as our ecosystems change. The next one's about connectivity. And this one's less about what we eat and more about the habitats that produce our seafood. We think that in order for us to be sustainable consumers, we need to take care of those habitats, because without them, we're not going to have areas for our fish to breed, feed, grow, swim, et cetera. And so our habitats are a really important part, and we as consumers actually play a role in that based on our behaviors and also the kind of policies and activities that we support. And then the last one is community. We call this one knowing your fishermen, but our fishing communities are really important to us in New England in particular. Our fishermen are out there almost every single day on the water. They see the changes that are happening, and they're actually some of our greatest marine stewards. And when we eat local seafood, and not just one or two local species, but a wide variety of them, we really support our fishing communities at the same time. And so all of these anchors relate to the work that we do at Eating with the Ecosystem. We do a combination of both research as well as education and outreach, and all of that kind of relates back to one or more of these 5 anchors. And so in the summer of 2017, we ran a citizen science project called our Eat Like a Fish Citizen Science Project. And actually, I know Ellen was one of our participants. I don't see anybody else in the room. Any other citizen scientists that took place in this project here? All right, so I think just Ellen, but we had a couple from GMRI and a couple from the Portland region. And during this project, we partnered with the University of Rhode Island, and we wanted to answer the question to understand how well New England's retail marketplace reflects the availability and the diversity of wild seafood produced in our nearby ocean ecosystems. Because if we want you to eat with the ecosystem, practice symmetry, then you actually have to have those species available to you. And then we wanted to draw on citizen scientists' real-life experiences to help explain why mismatches might exist and what can be done to kind of create a better balance between our marine ecosystems and what they're producing and what's actually available to consumers. And so for this project, I know it's a little light up here, we enrolled 86 citizen scientists from all around New England. We had 15 from Maine, and their job every week was to, for 26 weeks, for about 6 months, from May to October, I sent them a fish list of 4 randomly generated species out of 52 possible ones. And some of these species included things like lobster and scallops and haddock that most of us are really familiar with. And other ones included things like dogfish or hake, pollock, razor clams, periwinkles even, that maybe people are a little less familiar with. And so each week they'd visit up to 3 fish markets, and they'd record whether or not their species were available. And then if they found one or more of their fish, they chose which one they wanted to take home and purchase, and they'd cook with it and record their experiences both cooking and eating that fish, and share that with us through what we called their fish diary, which is an online survey form. And so throughout the 26 weeks, our citizen scientists visited close to 400 different markets. And this map over here shows all the markets that they visited, and the size of the dot represents how frequently that market was visited. And so they ended up making close to 3,000 different market visits. And you might notice up in Portland, there's one kind of really big red dot. Anybody would guess what market that is? Yeah, that's Harbor Fish. So we had, I think they visited Harbor Fish 127 times throughout the study. That was way beyond even some of the other really popular markets in other areas. Harbor Fish definitely stood out. We had people traveling to go and try out Harbor Fish. Yeah.
Did the markets know that this was going on?
Our citizen scientists talked to them, but we didn't give them a heads up ahead of time. So they definitely got to know our citizen scientists because they were going in week after week and asking for somewhat odd species. But that was not, they didn't get like a heads up. And so Harbor Fish actually impacted our data, so we called it the Harbor Fish effect, actually, because if you guys are familiar with Harbor Fish, it's a pretty diverse market. They carry a lot of different species, and so I'll show you that kind of as we go along. Our citizen scientists also ate over 1,000 different seafood meals that they created at home, and they shared 885 stories with us about their experience, as well as a bunch of really cool photos. So right here, I know it's a little hard to see. These are the 52 species that we included in the study, and this is what we call our market availability index. So it's a number of times the species was found over the number of times it was searched for. And so what I want you to get from this is that there's a few key species that kind of really dominate our marketplace in terms of local species. This is just the local species that our citizen scientists were searching for. And those are lobster, sea scallops, softshell clams, cod, and haddock. And I think us New Englanders are pretty familiar with most of those species. You can go to most restaurants and see them on the menus, and you can walk into most fish markets and pretty regularly find them. But 47 of the 52 species were found less than 50% of the time, and 30 of those 52 species were found less than 10% of the time. And some of those species that were found less than 10% of the time are also some of our most abundant species in our ecosystems. There are things like skate and butterfish and dogfish and Acadian redfish that are all very abundant species and yet very underrepresented in our marketplace. And so this shows us that there's really opportunities for growth kind of within these species in terms of representation. And if we want consumers to eat more in balance with the ecosystem, then they also need to have these species available to them. We also looked at the market availability by state as well as seafood market and distance from the coast. And so Maine came out kind of on top. Our citizen scientists were successful in finding their species 21% of the time. But as we said, the Harbor Fish was visited really, really frequently, 127 times. And so we just wanted to see what would happen if we took the data from Harbor Fish out. And Maine all of a sudden dropped down to 16%. So it's still like fairly high up with the rest of the states. But one market can really kind of make a difference. And the other thing is all these markets or all these states, our citizen scientists were successful less than a quarter of the time. And so it also shows us there's a lot of opportunity for growth. In terms of market type, they were most successful at seafood markets, followed by locavore markets. When we talk about locavore markets, these are things like farmers markets or community-supported fisheries, followed by specialty markets, which are markets that might be kind of like a specialty food market that has a bunch of different Asian ingredients as well as a seafood department. Or maybe they're like a local foods co-op of some type that has kind of a wide variety of products, but seafood is one side of it. And then supermarkets, which are your typical Hannaford, Stop and Shop, Shaw's, et cetera. We also looked at distance from the coast, and market availability for these species dropped off pretty dramatically the farther away from the coast that you got, which is not necessarily surprising. We also wanted to look at diversity, and so for this we actually used an ecological index called the Shannon-Weiner index. And the higher the number, the higher the diversity that the market or state had. And so if you look at the numbers, Connecticut kind of came out the highest at down here, followed by Maine, and then Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. But again, once we took out Harbor Fish, Maine actually dropped down to 2.92, which is actually the lowest. And so diversity really dropped off the farther you went north. And that actually kind of follows ecological patterns. If we looked at our marine ecosystem map from before, the Mid-Atlantic Bight is a very diverse ecosystem. It has all those warmer water species from the south that kind of mix with the colder water species. And this was being run, the project was being run in the summer, kind of warmer months. And so a lot of diversity was actually kind of available in our markets. Whereas the Gulf of Maine tends to be kind of few key species that are available. So it's kind of interesting that our markets actually did kind of reflect the diversity available in our ecosystems in some ways. We also looked at our seafood markets, which again came out at the highest in terms of diversity. And then with our supermarkets kind of as the lowest in terms of diversity. And distance from the coast, diversity definitely dropped off, again, the farther away from the coast that you got. And so if people, our citizen scientists that lived closer to the coast definitely had more success. Now, if our citizen scientists found more, one or more of their fish, we asked them to choose which one they wanted to buy, and they'd take it home and they'd cook with it. And then we asked them why they chose one fish over the other. And these were some of the factors that they recited back to us in terms of what helped them make their decision. And first of all, it was flavor. They wanted a fish that tasted good, followed by freshness, and then texture. The least commonly important factors were nutrition, eco-label, and safety. And so safety, you're thinking like mercury levels, things like that. I think what's interesting to note with our citizen scientists, I think we all want our fish to be fresh and flavorful, is that novelty ranks fairly high on our citizen scientists' kind of preferences, and familiarity ranks fairly low. I would say for an average consumer, that's maybe not necessarily the case. I think a lot of average consumers kind of gravitate towards things that they know. But we enrolled a citizen scientist who may have been an average consumer before the project, but they enrolled in a project where they were hoping to learn a little bit more about their local seafood. They were eating fish every week for 6 months, and a lot of times they were only able to find certain species. We had them reciting back to us that they were getting really sick of haddock. And so I think they were trying to kind of branch outside their comfort zones and try other things. And so novelty became kind of a more important factor. And I think what that shows, there is a group of consumers out there who do want to try new species, who do want to eat a wider variety of species. And so we should be really kind of catering to them as like the leaders kind of within it, and I think other consumers will follow. We also had our citizen scientists share their experiences with us back. And so we divided all of the kind of sections. We wrote up a report, and we divided all the sections by at the market, so their shopping experiences, in the kitchen, their actual cooking experiences, and then on the table, their eating experiences. And these are a few of the experiences at the market. I'm not going to read all of them for you, but I just want to go through a few of the themes and read the first one. And it says, for Lucky Week 13, I spent a little time looking back at all the fish recipes that I've prepared so far, the new-to-me species that I've been lucky enough to find, and all the great little seafood shops I've been introduced to as my search in the region has expanded. At the inception of Eat Like a Fish, I had no doubt I would find, prepare, and marvel at my brilliance with new, exotic, local species of seafood each week. It would be a great excuse to seek out specific ingredients and expand my culinary horizons. I never dreamed that most weeks it would be so challenging to find even one fish on my list. After 13 weeks, I've got lots of pent-up fish envy that will only be soothed by finding species that have eluded me, so like cunner and red hake and dozens of others. I have no doubt that I will continue the quest even after the study is concluded. On the other hand, I've greatly expanded my fish recipe repertoire for species that are more commonly found in my neck of New England. And this was a really common sentiment kind of throughout our citizen scientists, was they were able to find certain species, but they had a lot of pent-up fish envy compared to their other participants that were finding maybe some of the other less popular species. And so they were really trying to find new species and getting a little bit frustrated when they could only find the same ones over and over again. Some of the other themes really talk about the fishmonger interactions. So one of them talks about finding a couple fish markets where the person behind the counter was incredibly knowledgeable and how that enhanced their experience and how they continued to go back to that market because of it. One mentions being able to like special order species, which was a tip that they figured out through this project that they had no idea was available. One mentions how frustrated they were by their fishmonger interaction, how they felt like they knew more than the person behind the counter, and all they could tell them kind of was country of origin. And for our projects, they really needed tell us whether or not the species was caught in New England or not. And so in order for them to actually record it as available or take it home. And so their frustration with the lack of knowledge and the lack of information that was portrayed at the fish counter. So depending on the market that they were at, their experiences differed, but fishmonger interactions really influenced their experience. So for the in the kitchen section, this is our cooking section. They talked about the different types of methods they used to cook, which included baked and seared and steamed and fried and grilled. Those were probably the most popular. But they also told us what sources of advice they looked to when preparing species that were maybe a little less familiar to them. And overwhelmingly, it was the internet. So they Googled recipes or looked up YouTube videos of how to fillet a whole fish. And then the second one was fishmongers. So again, fishmongers were a really important part of the experience for citizen scientists, followed by cookbooks and then friends and family. They also shared some of their experiences cooking with us. We got a quote from Ellen about her experience with squid. She says, I was a bit intimidated by the idea of cleaning squid, but it was really quick and easy. I thought, though I had been instructed to wear rubber gloves, the black ink wasn't a problem. It just washed down the sink and didn't stain anywhere. I was thrilled with how the dish came out. I sauteed up the squid in about 2 minutes and served it with a lemon aioli sauce and a bed of lettuce. It was a big hit with my husband and me and our dinner guests. And I think a lot of our citizen scientists had that experience where they really stepped outside their comfort zones, tried new cooking methods, tried new species at home, and realized that it was not nearly as difficult as they kind of anticipated. We then moved to the on-the-table section. So this is their actual eating experiences. And we asked them for each of the species that they ate, kind of record the words that they would use to describe the flavor and the words that they would use to describe the texture. And the most popularly used words were mild, sweet, and buttery, which if I'm eating seafood, those are all words that I think of as pretty positive. The least commonly used words to describe the flavor was fishy, other, and then strong. And so, again, kind of negative words. So overall, their experiences were overwhelmingly positive. We did the same for texture, and the most popularly used words were meaty, flaky, and delicate, whereas the least popularly used words were gritty, mushy, and strong. Again, negative words were used much less frequently than the positive words. So again, in all the species, they had pretty positive experiences. They also shared their quotes with us, which kind of helps us understand a little bit why some experiences were more positive than others. And this one's from David Ford in Rhode Island. It said, I love the taste of sand crab, which is also called peaky-toe crab, I think more frequently in Maine. Maybe the best crab I've ever had, but it was way too much work for the small amount of meat you get. I bet one could starve to death if all you had to eat was sand crab, since you would pass away before you got your essential nutrients. And so this shows us an opportunity. While he really liked the flavor of the meat, he found it really difficult to pick the crab. So we either need to work with consumers to teach them how to pick crabs, or we need to have more processing available so they can get the picked meat already kind of prepared. So that's just one example. The bottom one is citizen scientists kind of overcoming their negative perception of bonito and actually really enjoying it, and the same kind of with mackerel and realizing that it could be kind of brought into their normal meal rotation. And so in terms of marketing tips, based on our citizen scientists, we kind of came up with tips for a couple different groups, and one is fishmongers. For fishmongers, so the people actually selling their fish, for unfamiliar species, for a certain group of people, it really helps to play up the novelty factor. There's a group of citizen scientists or consumers out there who want to try different things. There's another group of consumers out there who are kind of drawn to the familiar species. And so in order to also attract them to try some less familiar species, is to draw parallels between them. So if they really like haddock, they might also like pollock or hake, which is also a flaky white fish, for example. Another thing was selling the story. Our citizen scientists really enjoyed when the fishmongers could tell them a little bit more about their fish and the people who caught it. And we also realized how influential fishmongers actually were in the whole experience and really driving up demand for a new species. We also found out some tips for eaters. We realized that a shared learning experience, for example, we created a Facebook group for our participants where they could share their experiences with each other, share photos, et cetera, really helped kind of build confidence and maintain energy and kind of apply gentle peer pressure to motivate each other to keep going. We also realized that you can get special treatment at the fish counter. So special ordering species or asking for things to be filleted at the market if you can only have it available as a whole fish, or cleaned and scaled was an option. And if a species wasn't available at the counter, just people asking for it opened up these opportunities that they didn't realize existed. And it also created demand for those species. And we had citizen scientists reporting back that markets were actually starting to carry some of the species that they had been asking for, which was really cool. And then they also realized that cooking with a whole fish was not nearly as difficult as they thought it was. And so there's a lot of opportunities there. We also created species profiles for all 52 species. And so this includes stuff like how often a species was found, the price point of the species and the product form it was found in, the markets it was most commonly found in, the flavor, texture, as well as some tips and how it was cooked. So this is a great resource if anybody wants to go and check out some more information about some of these species. And it's all available on our website under research page, Eat Like a Fish. We also produce a cookbook, which we have out in the hall for sale. So I won't go too much into it, but if anybody has questions, we're happy to share. These features recipes for a bunch of those species that you don't have in your typical cookbook that are all local. And then we also created a group called New England Seafoodies. We had some citizen scientists after the project kind of tell us that they missed receiving a fish list every week. And that they kind of wanted some guidance on what they should be looking for. And they also kind of missed interacting with other fellow seafood nerds. And so New England Seafoodies is a group for everybody, not just our citizen scientists, but the general public, where we share what fishermen are catching as they're kind of catching it. And so you might recognize these two fishermen right here. This is Jim Ford and Dana Hammond. They are actually participating in another project with us and the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, where they have electronic cameras on their boat that are part of the regulatory system, and so in order for management, and so they help collect data using those. But we've also been using the footage from some of those cameras to share with you guys what they're actually catching. And so the video that we had showed kind of up before we started this talk was actually from Dana's boat, of him catching a variety of species, including hake and some flounders and things like that. And so we share that on our New England Seafoodies Facebook page, and share kind of what fishermen are catching, so you know that's your fish list. Go and ask for it at your marketplace. You can then share with us where you have success in finding it, which markets are carrying those species. And we also have been sharing recipes and tips, and it's also an opportunity for you guys to ask questions back, interact with fellow seafood lovers. In this case, someone wanted to know if slipper limpets were edible. This is another one where someone was asking about whether or not you could smoke dogfish, and we had a chef from Johnson & Wales actually respond with some advice on how to do it. And you can also just brag about your delicious seafood meals that you created. So if anybody's interested, we suggest that you join New England Seafoodies. It's a Facebook page. It's also an Instagram, #SeafoodiesNE. And I think I'm turning it back over to Kyle now.
Okay, so I'm just going to finish up with a few suggestions of some of the local businesses that we work with here at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute who are working to get more local seafood out into the marketplace. We've done a lot of work over the years with retailers, restaurants, as well as with college dining halls and other institutional dining like healthcare facilities and K-12 schools. One of the ways that we've done that is through our Gulf of Maine Responsibly Harvested program. So this is an eco-label that we developed a number of years ago. What it means when you see it is that that seafood is traceable back to the Gulf of Maine region, as you can see on that map, which also includes George's Bank in this case. And it also means that that particular fish is responsibly harvested, that we have gone through a full assessment verifying that that species and the way it's managed meet certain criteria around responsible harvest. And there's a lot of great responsibly harvested seafood from the region. We work right now with a lot of institutions through this program. So by our count, over 115,000 students around New England are being served Gulf of Maine responsibly harvested seafood. This is just a sample of some of the institutions that participate in the program. One really nice example of how institutions have been participating is here in Maine. So there's a food service management company called Sodexo that manages a lot of the dining halls at college campuses and healthcare facilities around the world, not just here in Maine. But 5 years ago, they decided to work with us on a goal to shift from sourcing almost no local whitefish, so sort of that flaky whitefish category. Their campuses that they managed here in the state weren't really buying much at all, and they decided to make a pretty dramatic shift to 100% Gulf of Maine responsibly harvested whitefish by 2020. And I'm really excited to tell you that they've accomplished that goal. A number of the campuses they worked with actually got to that goal early. They've really walked their talk, and that includes the UMaine system, with the exception of Orono, which does its own food service. They also are at Maine Maritime Academy, SMCC, Mecca, Central Maine Medical Center, and some other institutions in the state. So they've done a lot of work there, which helps then educate a whole new generation of people about a wider range of species, because one of the things that they have tried really hard to do is introduce a wider diversity of flaky whitefish, not just the typical favorites. We also have a Culinary Partners program. This is a program that many restaurants around town and around the region participate in. They have made some commitments around local seafood sourcing to participate in this program, and we encourage you to check out our website and look for restaurants that are involved in this program. And if you know any restaurants that you'd like to see get involved, definitely send them our way. We also have worked for a long time with Hannaford supermarkets, and they have an internal local label that if you shop at Hannaford, you're probably familiar with the black and white chalkboard local signs around the store. In the seafood department, we've worked with them on the back end to really define what local means in their seafood department. So when you see that local sign at the seafood counter in the fresh case, it means that that product came from the Gulf of Maine. In the frozen section, it's zoomed out a little bit given the fact that we don't have a lot of options right now in New England, so they consider U.S. Product to be local, which in the grand scheme of the global marketplace is much more local than a lot of other seafood. We also work, this is a part of our work that a lot of people don't know about, we also work with Hannaford's parent company. So they're owned by a European company called Ahold Delhaize, and they own these 6 grocery chains, so a lot of stores on the East Coast, up and down into the Mid-Atlantic and the South. And we work with them to advise them and help them implement a responsible seafood sourcing policy. So for all of these stores and chains, they're vetting every fresh, frozen, or canned seafood item that is going into their stores, and we're working with them on the back end to vet all of that seafood against the criteria that they have in place. So I think that's something that people don't always know about what's going on with many of your grocery stores. And I think with that, I'll end with this slide, which is, people are often confused about what to do with seafood. I think everybody wants to do the right thing. They want to make good choices and support whether it's sustainable and local seafood. And it seems complicated sometimes, but there's some really simple things that you can do, and hopefully Kate and my presentation tonight have helped you to understand that. And one thing is just eat more seafood. When you eat more seafood, there's more opportunity for fishmongers, for grocery stores, for restaurants to put a wider diversity on the menu. When there's only one fish dish on the menu, it can be really hard for a restaurant to diversify what they're selling. So eat more seafood in general, and eat a wider variety of seafood. I don't think you need to explain that further after what you've heard from Kate. And ask questions, and if you care about local seafood, ask for local. And on the asking questions front, I would definitely encourage you, if you don't get an answer that you like the first time you ask, be polite and ask again the next time you go to your favorite restaurant or your local market. A lot of the times it's tough there's a lot of turnover with staff who are on the front lines, whether you're in a restaurant or at a grocery store. And sometimes that person might not know. So keep asking. Let them know that you care about these things, and see if that makes a change. Our experience is that even at a large grocery store like Hannaford, a small amount of customers asking for something can really change the demand and what they're putting out in the case. So with that, we would love to give you all a chance to talk to each other for a few minutes about everything that you just heard. And we've got a few questions that we are posing to you to talk about. If you can just sort of gather with the group that's closest to you around the table that you're at and think about these questions for the next 5 or 10 minutes. We'll ask you to really briefly, like 30 seconds or less, share out from each little group maybe one resource that you might be interested in seeing. So the third question there. So we're curious to hear what you end up chatting about, and we hope you've got some things to think about after what you heard. So take it away.